I'm Lee Hiltenbrand. My email address is up here. It's very simple. It's my name at Gmail. And I would ask that if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to email me anytime. I'll try and answer them the best I can. I work for the City of Portland Building Department for, can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And everybody can see the screen fine, as long as I don't stand in the way. So I had some really unique opportunities when I worked for the city. Actually was dispatched to every building that burned in the city for a period of 2 years after the fire. I wasn't there to determine what caused the fire or whether it wasn't a matter of forensics. It was more a matter of what needed to be done to put the building back together. And during that time frame, I had some unique opportunities to see how resilient, especially wood frame buildings, were, and how they responded when certain elements of the building were missing. Shortly after that, I was involved with the dangerous building program in the city, and that required us, myself and another individual, to make determinations about building. This was back in the late 80s. And if you recall, the late 80s wasn't a real good time for real estate. So there were a lot of homes, particularly in Portland, that were being unkept and basically abandoned. So we would declare the building dangerous, and then through a series of hearings officers' orders, have the buildings removed. I also witnessed all those demolitions. So over a period of 2 years, I probably witnessed 40 or 50 homes being demolished by heavy equipment. Times have changed, as you probably know today, with lead and asbestos concerns. Buildings are taken down in a different manner. But at that time, they were done with a track hoe and pretty, let's get it done kind of thing. So again, I had this opportunity to understand the resiliency of particularly wood frame buildings when significant elements of the buildings were missing. I was really impressionable then, and I'm not anymore. But seeing these buildings that were literally missing some structural elements on the main level, and the upper part was still intact, it didn't fall. So based on those two criteria, I think that I have a pretty good representative idea of when buildings stay and when they fall. So that's some of what I hope to be able to share with you today. And just some general information before we get into some specific topics. National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration statistics: 2 tsunamis every year cause damage. Every 15 years, a destructive tsunami occurs. And I want you to think about that as you read the line items down below. Every 15 years, a destructive tsunami occurs. Over a period of 7 years, we had 4 significant tsunamis and a very, very tragic ending to that with a severe loss of life. Highest risk areas. I think most of us know that we're in a high risk area. Alaska, Hawaii, and the Pacific Northwest coast, Cascadia, is likely to cause severe damage to our infrastructure as well as our shelters. I failed to mention at the beginning, I encourage questions. There's 2 things that I hope for today. I have 2 goals for this presentation. One is that you all go home with an aha moment. That there's one thing that stands out in your mind as significant, and it spurs you on to learn a little bit more about it. Or it's just something that you didn't know about before. So the other thing that's really important to me today, and a goal, is that I learned something from you. A question that you might ask, or a topic that might come up related to what we're talking about today, gives me an opportunity to think. I like to think. I spent most of my life doing it when I wasn't taking care of other things. So I would encourage you to ask questions. That said, I have full program today, and there may be limited opportunity for me to answer your question effectively. Should that be the case, Linda Kozlowski has volunteered to scribe. She will write down your questions, and I promise you that I will respond to you either by email or phone. I have your emails on your sign-in sheet. So back to the presentation. Tsunami causes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. What is an atmospheric shock wave? Anybody got an idea? An atom bomb, for one. Okay. If that happens, I don't think we're going to be worried about a tsunami. But underwater landslides and meteor strikes are also significant factors to an occurrence of a subsequent tsunami. So be aware that you may not feel anything, but we get a tsunami warning from Oregon Emergency Management or Tillamook County Emergency Management. How many of you are signed up for Tillamook County Emergency Management notification? How many of you are not? Okay, I would encourage you to do so. It's relatively simple. You can do it online. You can go to their website, Tillamook County Emergency Management. It's a great resource to have an early warning signal if something's going awry. So, I would like you to, that's not very clear to me. Can you see that? Yeah. You can? Okay, good. Maybe I'm too close. I would like you to listen for a little bit. You don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to, but Bernard? Got a couple of folks that are going to read something to you here. And the reason I ask you to close your eyes is so that you can kind of grasp a hold of this frightening statistics.
A resiliency study for Oregon was conducted by the Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Commission following the 2011 Tohoku earthquake. The study resulted in a presentation to the Oregon Legislative Assembly in February 2013. Following are excerpts from that presentation. The estimated impacts of a Cascadia subduction earthquake in Oregon are catastrophic. In 1974, Oregon adopted a statewide building code that mandated some seismic resistance for new construction. Prior to that date, the majority of buildings in Oregon had been designed without regard to earthquake forces. In 1993, Oregon's building codes were changed to require designs that would accommodate shaking from much larger seismic activities. Every code cycle since 1993 have resulted in a consistent pattern of more resistant design criteria. Essentially, more than half of all the buildings in Oregon were not designed or constructed to meet the rigorous shaking produced during an intense earthquake. Almost half of the 2,193 public schools examined had a high or very high potential for collapse, as did almost a quarter of public safety buildings.
The impacts of a great subduction earthquake on Oregon are impossible to predict, accurately anyway. But several studies have estimated damage and casualties. Those estimates give us a sense of how far-reaching the Cascadia event will actually be. These are really sobering. Estimated consequences include earthquake deaths ranging from 650 to 5,000, with another 600 to 5,000 deaths due to the tsunami. 24,000 buildings completely destroyed, and another 85,000 with extensive damage requiring months, if not years, to repair. Approximately 32 billion in economic losses, 27,600 displaced households, and 10 million tons of debris. That's 1 million dump trucks full. That's a lot. Lifeline systems such as highways, pipelines, are particularly vulnerable to ground failure, which will be widespread in a Cascadia type event. As a result, the vulnerability analysis done for this program are grim. For example, if a possible earthquake would happen tomorrow, the estimate time to restore functions would be 1 to 3 years to restore drinking water and sewer systems in the coast zone. 3 years or more to restore healthcare facilities in the coastal zone. 3 to 6 months to restore electrical services in the coastal zone. These estimates of the time it would take to restore function necessary to maintain our population and economy are sobering, particularly when coupled with the likelihood that businesses will start to leave the state if the services are not restored within a month. So, if we pursue the policy of business as usual, our future after the next Cascadia earthquake will be include decades worth of decline in economics and in population.
So it is certainly sobering, and I don't share any of that information with you lightly. By the same token, I don't want you to be so frightened that you decide to sell your house tomorrow. Rather, it's more important that all of us have the knowledge and the capability to be prepared to adjust to a cycle like that may occur. Tom?
Is that stuff based on a 300 or 3,000 year quake?
I don't know. If you go to Oregon Emergency Management and go to the 2013 resiliency study, that may tell you that. I'm not certain. So, topics today, property insurance and you, and I do get some aha moments from people that I've shared this with previously. Actions to prepare your home, when it's safe to re-enter, and tips for hiring a contractor. Okay. So, property insurance. How many of you own a home? Good. How many of you have property insurance? Good. How many of you have earthquake insurance? Excellent. How many of you have tsunami insurance? We got one hand up, that's great. How many of you have landslide insurance? None. How many of you have mudslide insurance? Mud flow? None. Pretty typical. So we're going to learn a little bit about that here. Okay. So that was Loma Prieta, California. And homeowners policy wouldn't cover that, damage. Is that everybody able to see okay? Are you okay, Val? Okay. Everybody able to see okay? Okay, thank you. So homeowners policy wouldn't cover that, but earthquake insurance would. We're good. Seriously, I really, when I saw this slide, I thought, wow, that looks like Beulah Reed Road. Yeah. So, would earthquake insurance cover damage from that event? Probably not. And I say probably. By the way, in your handout, there's a lot of information, supplement to what I'm sharing with you here about insurance. The main thing I want you to keep in mind is that you need to talk to your agent. And you need to determine what's right for you. I can't tell you that everybody in the coastal zone should get flood insurance or tsunami insurance. What I can tell you is that not knowing about it puts you in a vulnerable situation. So if we have this event, something similar to that, God forbid, flood insurance might cover the result of that. Earthquake insurance won't. Okay. Landslide, covered by earthquake insurance, even if the earthquake, even if it resulted from the earthquake? Probably not. I say probably again because you need to read the specifics of your policy and talk to your agent. Okay. Recently, Napa, earthquake insurance doesn't cover that. Fire insurance doesn't cover that. Flood insurance doesn't cover that. So you have to have a specific, yes.
So that's specifically, that's a mud flow that we're looking at, correct?
Correct. The difference between a landslide and mud flow, landslide is where sections of the earth fall from gravity and displace soils. A mud flow is a result of saturated soils creating a high velocity river, if you will, of dirt and water. Okay. So, property insurance coverage, typical inclusions, fire, wind, hail, rain, and theft. I'll bet most of us in here have had some event where we had to utilize that. whether it was theft or fire or hail, wind, or rain. But I'll bet most of us have had some experience with that. Okay? I put 100% exclusions up there, and that really is not the case. Your policy may have some language that allows for some other damages to your home if you have a standard property policy. But again, I want to impress upon you the importance of checking your policy, talking to your agent, and determining what's right for you. Okay. Earthquake insurance, typical inclusions is damage resulting from movement of the earth, volcanic activity, tectonic processes, or other similar causes. Typical exclusions, tsunamis, landslide, and mud flows. So we're back to the same thing that I mentioned a moment ago. Tsunami insurance is flood insurance. So if you live down near the bay in Halem, you probably have flood insurance, depending on the elevation of your building. But that covers a tsunami in most cases. So think about that. Most flood insurance is through the NFIP, which is the National Flood Insurance Program. That's an arm of FEMA. And they do a pretty reasonable job of taking care of flooding with some limitations. And I want you to take note of that. This again is in your handout, but $250,000 for property. I imagine there's some of you here in the room that have a building that's worth more than $250,000, or at least you wouldn't be able to rebuild for that. Think about that. $100,000 for contents. This is really important. Thanks to Linda Kozlowski, Dave Dillon, and other folks who worked really hard with EVC to prepare our community. We are a tsunami-ready community. And as a result of that, we may be, and I say may because every situation is different, but you may be eligible for a discount on flood insurance as a result of the activity of EVCMB. Discuss the cost with your agent. Additional coverages is through surplus line carriers. So if you want to exceed that $250,000 limitation, it's available at a cost. Depends on how much money you want to spend. You have to weigh that out and see what's best for you and your family and your building. Anybody recognize that?
From the Halem River, isn't it?
The Halem River, right. So flood insurance covered a lot of that, and a lot of that was done through FEMA, through the NFIP. But if you recall, a lot of those buildings ended up being raised after that. That was because FEMA said, we're not going to cover you anymore if you don't do something to protect yourself. So that's why we see buildings being raised that are in floodplains. NFIP coverage includes the home and the foundation, electrical, plumbing, and heating systems, appliances, cabinets, debris removal, and a detached garage up to 10% of the policy. Anybody in here with a big shop? No? Okay. But you know there are folks in the area who have a big shop, and if you got a $250,000 limit and 10% of it for the detached building, you're looking at 25 grand to replace that. Not going to do it. So again, surplus carriers, additional coverage in order to meet your needs. $250,000 or $2,500 in valuable. That's all it's covered under the standard NFIP. Not covered, precious metals. The gold doesn't work. So I know you've all got that cache of gold in your basement, and it's not covered by NFIP. Stock certificates, cash, decks. Deck's not covered. How many of you have a big deck on your house? Yeah. Imagine, and we're not talking about a limitation. We're talking about no coverage. Decks are not covered by NFIP. Patios, spas, septic systems, wells. Any of you have a well? Nobody here from up on 53? Okay. So my point is, I just want you to be aware that what's out there and what you all have in your policy that you have failed to read for the last 20 years. Hello, me too. We've all failed to recognize something that's really critical. My lovely brides here, our most significant hard asset is our home. To lose that would be financially catastrophic. And I'm sure that that applies to a lot of it. What else do I need? Landslides, typically not covered under earthquake or tsunami, as I mentioned a moment ago. Landslide and mud flows aren't the same. I think I kind of delineated that. Landslides and mud flows may each require a rider known as a DIC or a difference in conditions policy. It's available. How much do you want to spend? I'm not suggesting that it's significantly expensive, but rather you need to decide what you want, what you think is appropriate for your building and your family, and then talk to your agent. Landslides. Again, NOAA reported 1,308 significant landslides between 1993 and 2016. That was across the country, in the U.S. Significant. I thought this was really interesting. Washington, Oregon, California, and Colorado accounted for 587 of those. Half. That's a lot. Oregon alone had 125 notable landslides over those 13 years. Think we're ripe for any landslides? Who lives in Wheeler? Yeah. Betsy? Yeah. You come from that zone.
Yes, we're red on the map.
Pardon me?
On the landslide map, we're red.
Yeah. Are you moving?
We're building pontoons
Paul
on the
says
house.
no.
You're building what?
We're building pontoons on the house.
Pontoons, okay. So this information is in the handout that I gave you. It may benefit you in terms of some contact information.
Pontoons.
We never, it's one of the most difficult things, and Linda and Dave and the other folks that have been involved, Eileen, that have been involved with EVC for a long time. One of the most difficult things to do is to plan for something that may never happen and devote a lot of energy to something that may never happen. So, yeah, this is all speculative. We know it's going to happen sometime, maybe in our lifetime, and by golly, I want to be ready. I want to be prepared. So we're going to talk about things that you can do to your house. And this isn't just about making them earthquake or seismically ready. These are things that you probably need to do anyway. But what do we tend to do? Well, we paint. And maybe we get the gutters replaced and cleaned. And maybe we get the decking restained and so on. But there are a lot of things with our buildings that we don't pay any attention to. When's the last time that you took 5 or 10 minutes and walked around your house? One time to the east and north, and another time to the west and the south. When's the last time any of you did that? I'm sure it's been a long time. I don't do it. I don't do it. I know this stuff and I still don't do it. So I don't practice what I'm preaching. But by doing so and looking down and looking up, you see things that you've never seen before. You become aware of things that might have an impact on the livability and suitability of your building. So we're going to talk about foundations, vents, decking, plumbing, fire safety, chimneys, wood stoves, porches, electrical, and safe storage. We're going to do all that in an hour. Okay? So foundations. I'm going to talk briefly about cracks, causes, and remediation. There are lots of reasons for cracks to occur. Sometimes they're insignificant, not in terms of the size of the crack necessarily, but about what caused it. And this is about a cause thing. It's not about, oh, I've got a crack in the foundation, I need to fix it. Maybe you don't. What caused that crack? That's what's important. And if the cause is a continual factor to the habitability of your building, then it needs to be addressed. Can you see that? That's on our house. Thank you. That's on our house. I could stick my finger in there and I didn't know about it. I did not know about it. So that occurred 6 years ago, Deb, is that about right?
Yep.
So 6 years ago we had this crack and I knew the right thing to do right away. I called a geologist friend, geotechnical engineer friend in Portland. And I said, hey, you need to get down here and check this out. What's causing this? I didn't know what it was.
Is that a vertical wall or is that flat?
Is that the
That's a
basement?
vertical wall.
Okay.
That's a exposed, about a 6-foot high concrete wall.
Load bear, yeah.
Yep, oh yeah, it's serious. So, soil is often the blame. Differential settlement occurs when you've got different soils underneath your building. And a lot of it, man, I may say some things today. Are there any builders in here? Oh, good. I may say some things today that might sound offensive to the building community, and I don't mean that to be the case. The building community overall throughout our area is great. They all want to do the right thing. But some building practices that have caused this type of thing to occur include, we've all seen it, they bring the little bobcat in or the hoe and they push sand over the top of vegetation and they build your house on top of it. Well, that's fine today. When all that vegetative material rots, it creates voids. Voids create settlement. Settlement creates foundation problems. So, if you can, if you're planning on having your new house built on your vacant lot, make sure that that doesn't happen. Make sure that any soil that's going to be used to support a building is compacted and so that it's suitable for that foundation. As an inspector over the years, we didn't have any charge to say, well, you can't put a foundation on there because that's not suitable soil. We had to rely on our geotechs at the office based on the location only of the project to say, oh, you know what? There's some bad soils in that area. We want a soils geologist to come and make an assessment before we're even going to give you a permit. So things happen outside the control of the building department. It's up to you whether you have work done or whether you're having a home built to be knowledgeable and try and affect those things the best you can. Tom, I'm going to ask you a question. Did you ever devote energy to going out to a site and making sure that folks were doing the right thing?
Well, up in Canyon Beach, where they just built the new grocery store, the building before, that was a swamp. And with fill on top of it, of course, and the previous building had gone like that. And when the building across the road was being constructed, I was building official up there, and I said, you have to get that compacted and approved. And
There you go. So, that building, that property owner had an advocate. Sometimes you have to be your own advocate. And if you have any doubts, hire somebody and pay them money. It's money well spent. Be it an architect, a soils geologist, an engineer, somebody to make sure that you're aware. So, the other thing that can cause problems is stormwater. That's what happened in my case. That big crack in the foundation. For some reason, builders in this area, I told you I was going to do it. Builders in this area tend to believe that sand percolates really well and it allows the water to go away. Well, it doesn't. Let me give you an example. When you walk on the beach and you're at the high tide line, so the sand is still damp, when you walk, your foot may make a slight indentation, but it still supports your weight without moving around too much. As you get closer to the tide line, say a wave just came in and broke and you walk in that, what happens? You sink, right? So what happened in our case was that the rain drains were made out of a material that wasn't suitable to carry all the water away off the gutters and downspouts. And there was a point, the water was coming downhill at a pretty good velocity, and then it leveled out. This is piping, but the joints were not secured. The joints were loose. It's called ADS, not ABS. ABS is a black pipe that's glued together. ADS is a slip fit joint, and when that velocity hit the bottom, it was allowing a lot of the water to drain right next to the footing. on that corner of the house. It allowed the house to settle. The geologist figured it out. What was it, about 2 months later that I had the new rain drains in?
Tell about him going with the rod dropping in. Yeah.
So have you ever seen a soils geologist? They have a tool. Do you know the name of the tool, Tom?
A pencil.
I can always count on you.
Oh.
Okay.
No,
So,
in Wheeler, they did in some of the landslide zones, they did a 4-foot test. And this is one that's, it's red marked already, and they said, oh, it's okay.
well, he took this rod. It's a T-handle, and it's made out of a very heavy metal. And it's not just steel. It's some kind of an alloy. It's very heavy. I don't think they're titanium because it costs too much. But he was probing the soil around different parts of the foundation, and he got to the corner of the house, and he went like this, and he let go of it, and it went all the way down to the handle.
Wow.
Hey, we got a problem. So there's not just one possibility for issues with your foundation. There are a series of several things that can occur. And it's wise to have, if you're not comfortable looking at it, gosh, pay somebody to come and look at it if you sense anything that's out of the ordinary. Sir?
So if you bought your house in the last couple of years and had it inspected,
Mhm.
does that home inspection also include foundations?
Are there any home inspectors in here? Okay. I will say something that I won't regret later. What we did as inspection staff monitoring code-related items allowed us to have a series of Bibles to go by. There were specific requirements mandated by the state and/or the feds that we had to follow. Home inspectors have no Bible. They have an accepted practices routine. So while a home inspector may be very good at his craft or her craft, they're not necessarily bound to anything other than one thing. Anybody got an idea?
The lender?
Protect the lender. They're not there to protect you. I say that loosely. I'm not saying that they don't want to protect you. But that's not really what their obligation is. John, correct me if I'm wrong, in your experience?
Well, in my experience, inspectors, going to this person's question, the inspectors will visually inspect the foundation for cracks, but they do not go into soils. And in your case, I think that was the bottom line issue.
Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, damn it.
Mark?
Well, but in a related way, I mean, all of our houses at some point were built to something called code.
Right.
And there are code inspectors. So does a code inspector come and look at your foundation?
We look at it before they put the concrete in the hole.
Sometimes.
Okay.
Before.
Right.
Do we look at it after? Yeah, but not. There has to be some level of trust that the concrete mix was correctly done at the badge plant. In very unusual foundations or very exotic foundations, we ask for core tests, and they test these samples. They have to withstand a certain compressive strength. In that case, yeah, it's up to snuff. We make sure that the reinforcing steel's laid properly per the plan. But I want to go back to something that Mark mentioned at the beginning of his statement, or his question, that buildings are built to code. I would not live in a building that's built to code. Code is a minimum standard. Most houses that are designed and erected today throughout the state of Oregon are designed by an engineer or an architect with capabilities to do that. The result of that is that their capabilities of withstanding seismic events or wind events. For years in the state of Oregon, and particularly on the coast, the wind design criteria was more restrictive than seismic. 30 years ago, there wasn't any seismic consideration. None. So it's kind of a babe in the womb, so to speak, in terms of our thinking now about how buildings should be designed. Paul?
I was just gonna say, if you're buying a house that's already built, especially here in Manzanita, there in the coast, in sandy soil, you have no idea if they cleared the vegetation or if they compacted it at all. And the other thing is that when they're putting piping in for draining, that's really not something that normally needs to be inspected either. So they may draw on their plans where it's at, but it doesn't tell you what kind of pipe it is, like yours, or exactly how it was put in. Is that correct?
There is a required inspection for rain drains.
There are.
Yeah, there's a required inspection for the termination, i.e. a dry well or a soakage trench or some other facility that's been designed to accept a massive load of water, and the piping also. That's more recent, probably in the last 20 years here. In Portland, we did it 50 years ago, but not here. So, go ahead. So I just want you to be aware of this. This isn't any great technology that you need to know, but this is what happened at our house. The geotechnical engineer came out and he epoxied this gauge onto the crack, across the crack. He actually found about 8 more cracks, and he put, I think, 6 of those gauges on. And what that does over a period of time, you can see the XY axis, XY axis here. And what that does over time is that if the crack continues to grow, there's a very slight movement that shows up on that gauge. In our case, once I had the rain drains in, we let everything sit for a year before I did anything else. No movement. So problem solved.
Well,
So
but
it
you
rained.
redid the footing too.
Yeah, but that was so I could have a man cave.
You did that crack.
There was some
That's what he
concern.
was doing. Yeah.
There was some concern at our particular house about the footings being wide enough for the soil conditions. And obviously, if you have poor soil conditions, the wider the footing, right, the load's distributed better, so it's more apt to keep everything up. So I went to an engineer friend of mine, and she designed some footings that were 32 inches wide and 36 inches high. The only reason they were that high, that's my part for the man cave, because I only had, as sure as I am, I only had 6 foot headroom in the it wasn't a basement, it was a rat slab crawl space, if you will, finished crawl space. And I thought, I can't have a shop down here. I gotta have more room. I gotta be able to stand a piece of plywood up, put it in a table saw. So I lowered the foundation 2 feet. Actually more than that, 2.5 feet, because I now have almost 9 foot of headroom down there. So that was the reason for that big footing. But anyway, got off on another story. So there are lots of ways to remediate these cracks, depending on what caused them. This is an example of some helical piers. These guys get screwed into the ground, and then there's a, wait a minute, oh, I got my little toy here. Oh. So up on the top of these pilings, they attach this mechanism that they can jack your building back into place. In our case, the building hadn't moved enough to warrant raising it. It did settle about 3/8 of an inch. Debbie and I looked at each other and said, I don't think we need to spend $1,800 for each one of these piles. So we elected to not do it. But in many cases, you've probably seen those installed someplace or seen activity related to the installation of piers to help support a building. You may not have known it, but that, I'm sure you've seen it. So this is one style. There's also just a pipe that goes down, and that pipe is driven in the ground until there's a certain resistance. And that resistance, it's actually the friction of the soil around the pipe that helps provide a fulcrum to put the building back up. Okay? So they can also do these things hydraulically, and they can have, you got 4 or 5 of them on the house, they can raise the whole house up at one time, or a whole section of the house up at one time, and so that it comes up evenly. And there's less of an opportunity for damage to the interior of the building that way. Okay? So here's another way. Anybody ever seen this or heard of it? It's called injection. They can do it with two different products. They can do a hydraulic grout, or they can do foam. It doesn't work real well to hold the whole house up, but how many of you have seen slabs that are doing this? Maybe a driveway, or maybe a garage slab, or maybe you got sometimes there's slab on grade homes. When the slab settles, they can drill holes in it and inject this grout or foam in there and actually raise the whole thing up. I've witnessed this. It is bizarre. When you see this big concrete mass moving, it's pretty impressive. So the capability is pretty amazing with that methodology. So foundation bolting, age of home, concerns, remediation. How many of you are in a home that was built prior to 1973?
Even later. It's even later that they upgraded the.
Well, they upgrade all the time.
I mean.
73 though is critical for one reason. In 1973, the state of Oregon adopted its first building code. 1973. Yeah, Karen, you found that humorous, didn't you? There's her aha moment. So that doesn't mean that codes didn't exist prior to that. Portland had codes in 1880.
Right.
So, but the state had not had a formal building code that was adopted throughout the entire state. So prior to 1973, it was kind of a mishmash whether or not your home was properly bolted to the foundation. When I say properly, there's criteria in the code today that's pretty much same as it was in 1973 in terms of the size of the anchor bolt and their placement along the foundation to tie the house to the foundation. And prior to about 1950, those of you that raised your hand for the prior to 73, how many of you are in a home that was built prior to 1955? Okay, I want to talk to you after this event. No, I'm just kidding. 1955, there was no mandate throughout the state, but that's about the time that builders started thinking, wow, this would be a pretty good idea. Let's get some anchorage in here and tie all the wood mass to the concrete mass. Prior to that, you know what was used? This is really funny. Builders would get to the site, you know, back in the 30s, 40s, it was one person or one company doing everything. They did the foundation and they did the framing and the whole works. And they would, while the concrete was still wet, they would lay what we call a mud sill, which is the first framing element, on the foundation, and they would pound these big nails into the concrete. That was the anchorage. Now, if you know anything about oxidation, those nails rusted out in about 6 months, so they provided no means of lateral resistance. But anything built prior to 73 doesn't mean your house isn't bolted to the foundation. It just means it's less likely in this area. So the concerns are, I think, relatively obvious. That the building can move. This is in Northridge, California, in 1989. Those of us that were watching, were you there, John?
No, I have a question.
Go ahead.
At the appropriate time.
Go ahead.
Okay, and this is the question, perhaps not so much in Manzanita and Nita County, but in the rest of Tillamook County, with these older homes, many of them are built not on poured concrete, but on cinder blocks. And so in terms of earthquake, maybe I should ask you this afterwards, but the only way I can figure that one could do it, and I'm surely not a builder, is to core fill you could core fill some of the every other one, for example, and then attach, in the proper way to the foundation at that point. Because it's a big problem for these older homes that are on concrete block or cinder block foundation.
Tell you what, I'll answer your question quickly for the audience,
See
and
you
then
afterwards.
you and I will get together at a later date, and I'll provide you some additional information.
Appreciate it.
What he's talking about are 16 by 8 by 8 cinder blocks, and back in the day, they just mortared them together and threw the house on top.
That's right.
Actually, this building that we're in has some of that, right back on that wall there. So if the earth starts moving, run out the door. The long answer is more involved. Trying to fill those cores after the fact is an arduous task, and it's probably not the answer.
Okay.
Because there's no reinforcing. Without steel, filled cores don't really do it. Okay.
There
Oh,
was a,
I'm sorry.
was a thing of using fiberglass coating on the faces of the concrete block
Uh-huh.
to do that. I don't know if that beats any of the codes anymore.
Boy, you know what, there is a system that has some provisions for providing rigidity and lateral resistance. I'm not familiar with
Yeah,
it.
again, I'm not up
Yeah,
to current.
Okay, so what happened here, what I was talking about, there's the mud sill, the element that's right on top of the foundation. And you notice it's still there. The reason I put this in here is to show you that it's a system. For the building to act effectively against seismic activity, the whole system has to work together. What didn't work here is that the joist system or the floor that sat on top of that plate was not adequately fastened to the plate. And that allowed the building to slide. Sliding is a huge problem. Just imagine, if you will, that when a building slides off the foundation, putting that back together and putting it back on there, it's not worth it. We're looking at $200,000-300,000. So, simple fix can prevent that from happening. Okay? So here's one of the fixes. I know, Tom, I did not go get the example, but hopefully this is. These are called FAPs, foundation anchor plates. They're made by 2 or 3 different companies. And this is that mud sill I was talking about sitting on top of the foundation. These can be installed by numerous folks in numerous fashion. I think this is a good time to tell you that there are people who specialize in this. I wouldn't dissuade you from doing it on your own. I think that there's adequate information out there that would allow you, if you were handy, to do this on your own. However, there are people who specialize in it. There are people who know the right way and the wrong way. And I'll give you a perfect example of what we used to see when folks tried to do this on their own.
What's to keep the bolts on the top from rusting out?
Nothing. We'll talk about that a little bit. Actually,
The material.
those are SDS screws. They're 4 inches long and they're galvanized. But these bolts down here, as you can see, they go into the foundation. If the foundation isn't adequate to support the load, what's the point? We used to see it all the time. You were talking about older homes, John. We would see foundations that were crumbling, and people were trying to install these plates. I mean, it's virtually useless. So I'll leave you with this on that note. If you're thinking about tying your house to the foundation, utilizing some of these products, it really is worthwhile to consider hiring a structural engineer who's familiar with these systems, and or work. Often people work in tandem. The structural engineer knows the installer, and they work in tandem to make sure that these things are done properly. Okay.
And that there's rebar in the foundation.
Yeah, if there's no steel in the foundation, what's the point? Okay, so here's an engineered design. And so this thing was fabbed up in a shop or something based on the determination of the structural engineer. The whole reason for that was, this is what we call a pony wall or a soft wall. And that thing will collapse in a heartbeat. Step over here to this for a moment. Due to time constraints, I'm not going to do the whole deal for you, but this is what happens. Okay, in a seismic event. It goes back and forth. If we apply some rigidity to that system, then that helps eliminate that, and that's what this device is for here. Yes. Linda?
How would you know, we have a poured foundation on a house that was built in the 50s.
Mhm.
How would we know that if there's rebar in it?
Well, the expensive answer to that question, there is equipment and machines that can measure through sonic
Mhm.
criteria that can measure not only where it is, but what size it is and whether it's intact. The simpler method, less expensive method, is with a metal detector that is willing to get into the concrete 4 or 5 inches, you know, to do the job. In other words, not a cheap metal detector. So here's another product. This is a foundation strap. Operates a little bit differently, but one thing that this does, different than the FAP, is that this actually ties the floor system down to the foundation rather than relying on the connection between the plates and the joist. Do not do this. Can you see that? So this is the kind of stuff that I saw on a regular basis when I'm out there crawling around under people's houses. Great idea, good intent, but yeah, this strap will probably keep this piece from going that direction, but it won't keep it from going this direction because there's no tension on it. There is tension, but it's not applied in the direction that's going to be valuable to limiting the seismic result or activity. Vents.
Question here.
Oh, Paul, go ahead.
Just one quick question. Even if you're around the perimeter, you're attached to the foundation. I know under my house they have fairly large piers, but they have a pier sitting in the middle of it. It looks like the only thing that's basically supporting that, the floor, is it's nailed on with a piece of plywood on all 4 sides, or at least 2 sides. Is that something you should be securing as well as the outside foundation?
Yes. Yes. We're going to talk a little bit about that here shortly. We're running a little bit behind on time, so we do want to get out of here at a reasonable time. I'm happy to stay here all day because I love this stuff, and I love having people who are receptive to listening and learning. Thank you. So we think vents. I mean, what vents? What's a big deal? Tell you a big deal. I got a neighbor, our neighbor, Steve and Bernard and Carrie. I got the whole street here.
Yeah.
So.
Keep it honest.
We have a neighbor down the street. Remember me telling you a moment ago about how important it is to walk around your house? He's on a steep hill. He didn't bother to go down to the lower part of his house for quite some time. He had noticed that this basement room, this finished basement room, by the way, this is an elevated floor. It's not concrete. But he had noticed that this lower room in the basement was really cold. Just didn't seem like it was heating up. So he decided for whatever reason to take a walk around the house. They had a big vent down there like this. It was a vent opening, and there was no screen. He poked his flashlight in there and looked around, and holy smokes, what are all those feces in there from? He had a raccoon family that had been living there. According to the critter getter, the raccoon family had probably been there for a couple of 3 years. They had taken all the insulation down. They had disconnected the heat duct that went to that room that was cold. And this cost Phil $15,000 to remediate. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd lots rather replace my screens with, here's a typical foundation vent, and I'd much rather replace this crap that comes from the lumber yards that's galvanized metal that rusts out in about 3 or 4 years with some good stainless steel screening. Readily available. You don't want to do it. There are people out there that will do this for you. And it really does make sense to keep those critters sealed up. Not the critters. Don't let the critters in. How many of you have heard about, in the wintertime, it's appropriate and probably a good idea to seal the vents up around your house? Helps keep it warmer? No. Not so much your but certainly in the valley where it's colder, people do that. Well, there's the potential result of that. Serious mildew and mold. What do you suppose the remediation costs are on something like that? Pretty high. So if you have a moisture problem, we had one, and we attacked it with a dehumidifier. We have a dehumidifier in the crawl space that runs 24/7. Our house feels dry when you walk in. There's no kind of clammy, cold feel to it. I'm not suggesting that you go out and buy a dehumidifier, but I am telling you that if you're going to seal your crawl space vents, you better put a dehumidifier in the crawl space. Sir?
And one option is that you close up the upwind side of the vents in the winter because rain blowing in can go in 10 feet.
Point well taken, thank you.
But keep the other ones open.
Okay, event, can you guys see that?
Oh, no.
Sorry. Boy, it's real clear on the screen over here. Anyway, you know what an event is, right? Up between the rafters to supply ventilation to the attic. Same thing there. We had the experience. All this stuff happens to us. We had wood rats in our attic, and they
We had
next
starlings,
year,
too.
the next year, the birds came in and they nested starlings, and they pulled the insulation out and they pooped all over up in the attic, and we had a mess. So I have now replaced, go ahead. I have now replaced our screening with stainless steel. And guess what? No birds, no wood rats, it's great.
They're screwed in so that the little critters can't just
And they
pull it out.
How many of you have a wood stove in your house? Great, I love them, they're wonderful. What do you suppose happens to a wood stove in a seismic event?
Yeah, don't slide.
So, that floor is pretty slick anyway. You got this heavy stove on there, but guess what? It's gonna dance in a seismic event. It might go 3 or 4 feet sideways, and then this little pipe up here called the stove connector, chimney connector, excuse me, disconnects. What do you suppose would happen if you were heating your home at the time with that wood stove? Fire.
Your
Fire.
insurance would cover it for fire rather than.
So, point being is that it really does make sense to secure your wood stove. This is kind of a goofy thing. I went online and I looked all over. Have any of you ever tried to find something online and been really frustrated? Yeah. I tried to find a really good example of securing a wood stove to the floor. They're showing bolts and this masonry and so on. Most wood stoves don't even have to have masonry underneath them as a protective element from the heat from the wood stove generating the fire. Most of them don't even require that. By the way, when we inspected wood stoves, there were very limited information in code. Very limited. What we did inspect for was the installation manual. The installation manual is the gospel when it comes to proper installation of a wood burning appliance. Okay.
Lee,
Oh,
is
sorry.
that diagram, is that in our?
No.
handouts?
Is your wood stove on a masonry surface?
It is. Well, no, it's on one of those
Pads?
ceramic pads,
Okay.
yeah, but I don't think it's molded down.
Give me a call. Can you see that?
Cool.
It's inside.
Can you see it?
Wood on the outside.
Okay. What's wrong with this picture? There's 3 things wrong with that picture.
Next to the
Too
wood,
close.
fantastic.
Too
Yeah.
close to the wall.
Yeah.
The fuel's next to it.
Sir?
Fuel is next to it.
Fuel? Yeah.
And it looks like it's open.
On the back of your stove or underneath your stove, somewhere on your stove, if it was manufactured post around 92, 93. It has a clearance chart on it that's required by the state of Oregon, And you should read that once in a while, prior to or even after using your stove, to make sure that you're doing the right thing. This is clearance to combustibles. You'll notice that there's US and Canada. In the US, we've all heard of UL listings. In Canada, they have the Canadian Standard Association, CSA. And they vary. But both of those testing agencies go through a very rigorous program of taking that particular stove and putting it into an alcove or whatever application, and they use heat sensors and they test it to very rigorous standards. So that's how all these things are developed, and if you don't follow those, you've got a real risk of a fire at your home. I would encourage you to look at that listing on your stove. You probably can't see that, can you?
Cool.
As it says, be careful when you read things on YouTube. This was a suggested design for sheltering in place as a heat source.
Oh,
What is it?
Well, there's a wood stove with single wall pipe going up here, laying on top of a piece of plywood.
out a window.
I mean, it's crazy. Okay. So chimneys and flues, we've got both masonry and metal flues, and we've got concerns with both of them. We don't have a lot of masonry fireplaces here in Manzanita, but some of you I know have other homes in other parts of the state or West Coast. Masonry chimneys are very heavy. That chimney probably weighs in excess of 6 or 7 tons. Tons. And what happens is, up until about 1990, 1989, there was really a limited code requirement for footings for a fireplace. So whoever the mason was generally poured the footing, and they didn't pay any attention to the soil conditions. They didn't pay any attention to soil bearing capacity. So they poured this footing and then built this mammoth heavy item on top of it. And you can see what's happening there. We used to see it all the time, pulling away from the building because it can't go in, it goes out, tips away. So for a fireplace like that in today's code, that footing would be 7 or 8 feet wide, and the depth from the house would be about 5 feet, and the footing would be massively thick with lots of steel in it. But back then they weren't. So if you're in an older home with a masonry fireplace or an outside wall, that might be an application for those guys to come and put those pin piles in to help shore it up. Might be.
Yeah.
That's what happens in an earthquake with masonry chimneys. They are extremely vulnerable. Prior to, again, about late 80s, early 90s, there was no requirement for any vertical steel, vertical reinforcing steel in a chimney. Now there is. So if your home was built prior to late 80s, early 90s, and you have a masonry fireplace, beware. I'm not talking about full-time, I'm talking about during a seismic event. Stay away. And if any of you are looking at your neighbor's house, don't go by the chimney. Stay away. Okay, metal flues need support. There is not a code requirement actually, but again, it's a product listing from the manufacturer of the product that tells you when you need to seismically secure these things due to the height. Most of them say 5 feet. One of the major manufacturers, Selkirk, says 5 feet. And that 5 foot is measured from the high side of the roof up to the underside of the opening. We've all seen that, right? You've all seen it around town. The reason I share this with you is when they're put in, they're done right. How many of you have that kind of system and have had your roof replaced? Okay, so I think you see where I'm going with this. When people do work on your house, above your house, under your house, it's someplace you don't typically look. They may have, not on purpose, but inadvertently left something undone. I just saw it the other day down, well, I don't want to spoil the moment. So, water heaters. Make sure they're secured. There's a pressure relief valve, proper termination of the pressure relief valve, and it is a resource for potable water for us after a seismic event. Most water heaters contain anywhere from 50 to 75 gallons of water. That's a goodly sum of water for us to use for drinking purposes if our water system is
for it
soiled.
though.
What was that?
You want the proper hose for it though,
And what hose would that be?
potable. You
Okay,
want one that you know, garden hose, I always thought you could drink out of those, but they've got
We
things
all
that you
do.
don't want.
yeah, yeah. You can get an RV hose, potable water hose. Okay. So this is, Mary Jane, this is in your handout. By the way, I didn't explain the handout at the beginning, and my apologies for that. The first 8 numbered pages have to do with what I'm talking about today. The other information after that is supplemental, things that you might find helpful. So there are 2 pages in there, the last 2 pages of the handout, that share information about proper ways to strap your water heater to the wall. Any water heater that's been put in the last 20 years is already strapped properly because it's required. But prior to that, if you have an older water heater, it may not be done. Or again, if somebody came and did work in your home and disconnected it for some reason, you no longer have that support to keep it in place during a seismic event. Okay? This is a pressure relief valve. In a water heater, they're required to be rated at 150 psi, 210 degrees Fahrenheit. So we all know what happens with water over 210, right?
It's warm.
Boils, pretty warm. And over 150 pounds of pressure, that's unusual for that to occur. That'd have to be a really weird event. We'd all get Dan in trouble if we talked about that. You see there's no pipe coming out of here? Imagine if that thing went off. Now it goes off when the water's 220 degrees or 160 pounds of pressure. If you happen to be walking by that when that goes off, we're talking immediate 3rd-degree burns. Serious. So code requires that to have a pipe that's extended down to within 6 inches of the floor or outside to within 6 inches of the ground so that you don't get burned or scalded. There's another good reason to have a pressure relief valve on your water heater. They are bombs. That is not been altered in any way. That was a result of a water heater either being overpressurized or heated beyond a reasonable limit, and the pressure relief valve didn't work. So I can assure you that this is not funny stuff. It's a bomb.
It's one of the most popular episodes of Mythbusters, too, when they overheat the water heater.
Yep. I don't know if you all heard that. Dave was talking about the Mythbusters program on TV. They did that. They overheated the water heater and it shot off like a rocket.
They took out the house on the way.
Yep. Okay, this is a typical water heater. That's the valve to shut it off. Why is it important for you to know where the shutoff valve is on your water heater?
I know.
Okay, Carrie.
After the earthquake, if you're able to get to your hot water heater, turn off the supply,
Why?
because it'll all drain out when all of our pipes in the street.
Thank you.
Go back out to the street.
Okay, did anybody catch that? Do you understand the methodology here, the reasoning? If the water will back siphon out of your water, if there's a broken pipe out in the street, it will back siphon out of your water heater out into that break in the street. You just lost your 50 to 70 gallons of potable water. So when it's safe for you, as soon as you can, shut that water supply off. Okay. There's the boiler drain at the bottom. You can hook a potable water hose onto that. That's how you get your water out of the tank and into your drinking vessel. I can't tell you how many crawl spaces that I was in over the years that don't go there. I was in a number of crawl spaces over the years that I was astounded at the stuff I saw down there. And again, I want to reiterate the importance of, if you don't want to go down there, fine, but send somebody down there who has an eye, who can verify if things are going south in your crawl space. That was not an uncommon sight.
What is it?
Sorry. This is an old cast iron drainage line. That's some ABS pipe. Somebody just put some duct tape on it to hold it together. And now it's spilling raw sewage into the crawl space. Okay? So, whether you do it annually or whatever, just be aware that stuff can happen down there and you don't know about it until you got a problem. And then it costs you a bunch of money. And meanwhile, you're living in a very unkept situation. Water meter, city shut off, I have a special tool for that. This is your handle on the public side for you to turn your water off. Another good thing to do after a seismic event, get your water shut off. If there's any water in your house, if your pipes haven't broken in the house, you've got anywhere from 15 to 20 gallons just in the piping in the house. Got two typical kinds of indoor shutoffs to help you recognize what you might have in your home. This is a gate valve. This is a ball valve. Doesn't matter what they are, but you need to know how to turn them off. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. This one's on when it's in line with the pipe. It's off when it's 90 degrees to the pipe. Know your disconnects. Disconnect is another term for a breaker or a fuse. It's a means of disconnecting the power either to a given circuit or to the entire house. Okay. Okay, who can I pick on? Mark, where's the main disconnect?
Down there at the bottom.
Mark says down here. Anybody else got a guess?
Outside.
Outside? Okay.
Isn't there a switch?
Dave's thinking it's a meter main. And sir, your name?
Gary.
Gary.
Isn't there a large switch at the top?
There he is, right there. Right there. That's the main disconnect. By flipping that one switch, you've disconnected all the power to your house. Dave, what you're talking about is a meter main where they have a switch right outside of the meter, and there are some homes here in the area that have those. Why do we want to turn our power off?
Fire.
During a power outage.
Power surge.
Okay, Dave says fire, power surge, those are two good answers. Okay. So, just imagine that you're cooking something on your electric range and the power goes out. The power's out for 4, 5, 6 hours. You get in the car and you leave.
The power comes on.
And the power comes on. Oh crap.
You're getting ready to get
Yeah, you get a trick when you get on. I think you can sense the safety issue with leaving the power on. Let's say it's a seismic event. Well, gosh, you don't have to worry about it, right? Power's out. Who knows when it's going to come back on? That's the point. Who knows? So what can happen when the power comes back on, the power company gets everything back, whether it's a power outage or a seismic event, which would be both, is that sometimes there is a voltage drop or a voltage change in the power entering your home. Electronic devices or anything with a motor could be adversely affected by that. Right, Stephen?
Yep.
Yep. There's a guy that just retired from the Eugene Water and Electric Board, our new neighbor, and he's going to be a valuable asset to our community with his knowledge.
Isn't this a good time when a whole house surge protector would be nice too?
Any of you ever heard of those? Any of you ever heard of a surge protector? Okay. Probably got them on your little power strips and so on. You can actually get a whole house one. A friend of ours did that, and it saved a bunch of equipment because it affected the whole panel. And being as he had a whole house surge protector, it did the job. So it actually augments the existing circuitry in the panel.
So,
Oh, Mark?
since the power usually goes out for a few minutes rather than a few hours, another benefit is to have, if you get a surge protector put in there, is to put some sort of a light or indicator on the other side of your panel, so you know when the power comes back on again.
And how would you do that?
You call up the Tilden PUD and have them do it for you.
Okay.
They said something.
I wouldn't do that. I
All right.
wouldn't do that. But
Well, yeah, I mean,
how do you know when the power's back on?
You look at your neighbor.
Look at your neighbor that
Streetlights are on.
Our builder forced us to put whole house surge protectors in, and they have a light on them, on the outside of the box. So if it goes out, it's dead. If it's lit, it's live.
Kudos to your builder. That was a great thing. All right, so the electrical code, National Electrical Code doesn't say anything about securing service masts. They leave it up to the local jurisdictions, in this case our PUD. Local PUD says that if that mast is more than 3 feet from where it penetrates the roof to the masthead, if it's more than 3 feet, it has to have guy wires on it. And I'm sure most of you have seen guy wires on the masts around town, but I just ran in, seriously, I just saw it not more than 3 or 4 days ago. Somebody just got a new roof put on. They did not hook the guy wires back up. Okay? That's an expensive fix right there. The alternative to that, if you have the guy wires on, is that the tree limb comes down and it breaks the power line and you're without power. But that doesn't cost you anything because that's up to the utility to take care of that for you. So save money, make sure that your mast is correctly guyed to your roof. And again, it's a perfect example. I mentioned earlier about the crawl space. Make sure it's on that you take a look at your roof. And anybody that does work on your house, that they've done the appropriate things after they've left, or before they've left. Okay. You see that? So this is a perfect reason why you need to have your electrical inspected every once in a while. I would say any house that's been built in the last 15 or 20 years and you haven't had any electrical work done on it, you're fine. If you have an older home, John, gentleman behind you, couple in the back, if you've got an older home, you probably had a bunch of work done on it by folks who didn't know what they were doing over the years. Maybe with no permits, maybe with no inspections. And stuff happens. So consider an electrical safety inspection. A contractor will do that for you for somewhere between, I shouldn't quote any numbers, I hate to do that, but under $300, an electrical safety inspection. Pretty typical, really. Attics and crawl spaces, stuff that's been jury-rigged over the years. Is that a fire waiting to happen or what? Bad news. Hey, this one doesn't cost you anything. Well, you gotta go buy a power strip, okay? But it's amazing the things that people will do to avoid having to do the right thing. Decks, ledgers, columns, things to look for concerns for remediation.
Oh, yeah.
7 years.
Slide in.
So I tried to get some more current statistics, but from 2003 to 2007, there were 32,000 deck collapses in the United States. 32,000.
Reported.
In those events, there was 40,000 injuries. The particular report I read was not classified in terms of how many were severe and how many were minor injuries, but 40,000 people injured as a result of deck collapses. Pretty serious. And you know what? We're in an area where that's more likely to happen than the valley. Okay? Why, Tom?
Because I could not get the state building department to require spacers between where it's woven to the house. Seriously.
Water penetration. Okay?
Overload.
How many of you have a rental? That's what happens.
At a party.
Yeah. Granted, sometimes a deck collapse is beyond our control, Sometimes we've maintained it properly, but more often than not, we're to blame because we haven't taken the proper oversight and taken care of our deck with proper maintenance. I'm serious, folks. I have seen that. When it was still intact, it's still there. I think I put a note in your handout. Make sure you inspect your deck carefully. Yes, even the underside. When you're walking on it, you can't see this stuff. Get underneath, look at it, see if there's any deterioration. Everybody know what pressure treated lumber is? It's a great idea. It was a wonderful, wonderful product that allowed outdoor appurtenances to stay intact longer. And then in 2004, the EPA said, we're going to outlaw the preservatives that we're using on material. It was called, the acronym was CCA, it was chromated copper arsenate. And the term arsenate strike any resonance with you?
Don't look at
The annual usage of arsenic in the process of pressure treated lumber annually was 4 million pounds. So the EPA says, don't worry about your existing deck though, it's okay. All right. But they started making some new products, new treatments, and they are, there's a couple of different products out there. AC, can't remember. Anyway, it doesn't have as much arsenic in it, doesn't have any arsenate in it. What it does have is massive amounts of copper. Anybody ever heard of electrolysis? Okay. So what happens, I don't know if you can see these or not. These guys are all rusted. Okay, let's go to the next one and see if we can see better. Those are galvanized screws that were exposed to modern day, i.e. since 2005, treated lumber. 12 months exposure. Now what do you suppose that means in your deck or your outdoor porch? The fasteners may be failing today.
Does the copper create a current or something that eats
Yeah,
away at
it's
it?
electrolysis. It increases the opportunity for oxidation. Okay. So one of the things that Tom was kind of alluding to, this piece is called a ledger, and that generally gets applied to the house, and then the deck is built off of that. There's a lot of different ways to do a ledger right. Most times they're done wrong. Most of the times they are nailed onto the facade of the building, and that's the fault of the builders for not doing it properly. Code requires bolting. These are either lag bolts or through bolts. They go all the way through the material into studs or into a solid piece of material back behind this wafer board. If you don't see bolts on your ledger when you go home today, really think about getting it done. Remember that first picture of the deck that was diving off? That was a problem. It pulled away. It's catastrophic. I mean, just this last summer up in Kalispell, Montana, 50 people were sent to the hospital from a deck collapse. 50 from one deck collapse at a lodge. And I think, I don't remember the exact number, 15 of them were in critical condition. I'm sure you don't want that to happen to anybody, but you definitely don't want it to happen to your family or friends. Decks are, they are an accident waiting to happen.
And that is not a appropriate way of doing it, unless you have Z-metal over it. That's where 7 years, it takes 7 years and the deck collapses.
Yeah, anybody got an idea of the average life of the deck at the Oregon coast?
7 years.
Well, I'll dispute that one. 20 years, 15 to 20 years. That's average life.
If built properly, you mean?
If built properly, 15 to 20 years. I'll bet half of you who have a deck in this room have a deck that's older than that, think it's fine. I'm not telling you to do anything, I'm suggesting that you have somebody look at it and verify that it's built properly and it's being maintained properly.
So if you're on a deck and you feel it sort of squish on you or sway, you think there's something wrong?
Go to the neighbor's. Porches and roofs, pretty much the same thing. Code requires that all columns are attached with a mechanical connector at the base and also at the top. Now, it wasn't required a few years ago, but it is required now. So if you don't have some kind of a device like this at the bottom of a column, what do you suppose would happen in a seismic event? Here's a column, seismic event, it's jumping up and down. Sometimes when it jumps up, it doesn't come back vertical. Sometimes it does this. And then you've got a failure in that element of the building. So this is a typical device. There are lots of devices that can be used. I'm not advocating any particular one, but this is an attachment at the top of a column to a horizontal framing element. Okay. Monitor the health of your porch. Man. Hey, did anybody know that Manzanita has a very, very unusual, and I say Manzanita, not Wheeler. You guys are off the hook on this one. We have an infestation of subterranean termites.
Wow.
And tornadoes.
Yeah. So subterranean termites only come out at night, and the way that you can tell if they're there, I had those too. We had those too. Well, you're supposed to take care of this stuff. Subterranean termites leave a little trail of sand up the side of your foundation, either on the exterior or the interior. You never see them. There isn't any indication that they've done anything because unlike the typical, I'm not an entomologist, but the typical termite that you might not see the termite, but you see the after effects. These guys get up inside the wall. They don't typically invade any exposed material. So, you familiar with those, John?
No.
Talk to your clients. I had a critter getter come out to our place, and when I opened up a wall to remodel a bathroom, with a permit, by the way, I had a permit, I noticed these trails going up the side of the studs. I didn't know what it was, so I called the critter getter, and he came out, and yeah, subterranean termites. Fortunately, they had abandoned the property as far as he knew. He couldn't find any recent activity. This was old activity, but he went ahead and treated the outside of the house, and then he follows it up every year. So know that Manzanita has these critters, and they're nasty. Untreated columns. Anybody got? Oh, I'm sorry.
They used to, when they did inspections in my day, it was powder post beetles.
Powder post beetles. Yeah.
How do those differ as far as damage or problems?
You know, she's asking about powder post beetles, and honestly, I can't speak to that. I mean, they are a completely different animal,
Yeah.
but in terms of the effect on the wood products, I don't know. I know they're bad.
Well, I had them in a piece of furniture one time, and I had it treated. He said that they would not have gone to any other piece than the one they came out of. So I don't know other than that. But I was also told, because I had in a different house had termites, and I was told we're at least lucky we don't have the kind they have in the south, because this, once they've been treated, it generally goes to their home and takes care of them. So.
Fire extinguishers. Go ahead. How many of you have a fire extinguisher in your house? How many of you have more than one? How many of you have one on every level? How many of you have a Kidde? K-I-D-D-E. Kidde, K-I-D-D-E is a brand of fire extinguisher. They're at Home Depot, Ace Hardware, everywhere.
Even Costco.
There was a recall on those in November. With the plastic mechanism.
Yes.
Well, okay, I'll get to that in a minute. ABC type, that's what you want. takes care of wood and paper, takes care of gasoline and petroleum products, and also electrical fires. So this was not recalled. You notice the metal handle and the metal, there's a metal column right up there that goes down to the fire extinguisher. These are really cool. They cost more up front, but they're refillable. The ones with the plastic handles you cannot refill. It's buy, 2 or 3 years later you throw them away. Am I right?
Well, you watch for the pressure on it, if it's down, then you throw it away.
Yeah, but you can't refill them. That's my point. So these guys are about 70, 80, 110 bucks, but you can refill them. There isn't any place in the area here to refill them. There are 2 places in Portland you can get them refilled.
And on the good side, a lot of insurances will give you a bit of a discount if you've got fire extinguishers, so.
Thank you. Okay. So there's a little gauge on there. It tells you, this is exactly the one I'm talking about right here. Go online, go to KIDDE, recall, and I'm not sure what the deal is on that, whether they give you any money back or give you, credit on a new one. I have 5 of them in the house. I haven't replaced mine, but, again, do what I say, not what I do.
So the mechanism works, it's just that once they're out.
Actually, the one that failed, Gary, or the one that's been recalled, there was been 1 death attributed to the failure of the product to work, function properly. When you squeeze the handle, some of the mechanism breaks.
Great.
Yeah, not a good thing. Okay, I need to. Oh, hazardous chemicals. Okay, go ahead. One more. Okay, we all got the stuff in the house, right? Or in the garage, someplace. What's going to keep that on the shelf in a seismic event? Nothing. So, good idea, keep it all together and consider some type of a barrier on the front. I know I have a lot of, not a lot, I have some wine. I don't have a lot. But I worry about, because I haven't actually secured those racking as I should, and I really worry about losing my wine. I'm sure that you worry about all those hazardous chemicals being on the floor if you have a seismic event, and you've got to come back and shelter in place, and you've got this stuff on the floor that is terrible to clean up, is a potential fire hazard.
Your chlorine and your ammonia, is that what it is?
Yeah, together.
Chlorine and ammonia. Yeah, she's right on. She's the chemist from the group. Thank you.
Certs.
Yeah. Okay. Has anybody had an aha moment?
Yeah.
More than one?
Yeah.
When did they stop building with asbestos in the US? Building with asbestos or stop using lead? What were those?
The question was, when do they stop building with asbestos or using lead paint? You can still buy lead paint.
Oh, okay.
Utilizing it in common building practices and residential use, 70s. I mean, lead paint was an early catch on it. Asbestos was seldom used in its raw form, seldom used in homes. It was used a lot as lagging on piping and stuff. But
when we took down the Hoffman house,
yeah,
there was
asbestos.
And I know you're concerned about the house where
right. So one of the most common places for asbestos to be in our homes is in the popcorn ceiling, and the other one is a VAT floor tile, vinyl asbestos tile. The squares, if you've got that in your house, it probably has asbestos in it. Not to worry, asbestos is fine when it's in a stable state, it's not being disrupted. So as long as you're not removing it, you're certainly not subject to asbestosis.
Of course, if you're there in an earthquake and it's being moved, then you're deep.
I don't know about that. Probably right.
Lee, an interesting fact that
Yes, Karen.
in Oregon, when I taught here in the 70s and 80s, Washington, D.C. said you have to clear out all the asbestos out of school buildings or you won't get federal funding. Well, in the late 80s, early 90s, I was back east. Outside of DC and in DC, all the buildings had asbestos in it. And they're just still now getting it out of those buildings.
Again, if it's not friable, i.e. if it's not been disturbed, it's typically okay. You know, what, I'm gonna expose something to you that might really blow you away. Our water supply that comes from the ground, not the well water, but the water that comes from the supply. Those pipes are made with asbestos.
They're also broken.
Yeah, they're broken, so we're not using that right now. So asbestos in certain conditions doesn't have a detrimental effect on us because it's not friable. Okay? So we are short of time. I'm going to kind of rapidly go through this. I apologize. You guys have been great, but I just felt like there were certain things I want to expound on a little bit, so forgive me for that. Probably not going to make it through this whole deal. One note, the 8th page of your handout is how to hire a contractor. The most common call that I got as a senior inspector in Portland for residential purposes was, I need to know a good contractor. So I came up with a little system, and that is on page 8, and I heartily recommend that you consider using that when you go to hire somebody. It's not just about calling somebody that so-and-so said's good and by golly, that's the guy I want, or the woman I want. There may be other parts of that you want to examine. So take a look at page 8 when you leave today and utilize that system, and I'm sure that you'll be better off for it. So when we go back in our homes, when do we go back in our homes after a seismic event? Do we leave our homes during a seismic event? No. We stay in the house.
Not if it's going downhill.
After the event has subsided, after the shaking subsided, then you can leave. But how do you know when to come back in?
Inundation zone, you know how to separate that.
You're right. You're right. You're going to get out real quick in an inundation zone. You live too low, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah. You need to get on higher ground. So these are some things that you want to consider. We all have go bags, right? Everybody has a go bag?
Yeah.
Okay. There are also some things that you want to have associated with that go bag. Sturdy footwear. A hard hat's not a bad idea. They're not that expensive. Think about it. But anyway, safety gear and exterior evaluation of the house, aftershocks, aftershocks, aftershocks. What are the most prone times for aftershocks?
Anytime.
Don't know. The most severe ones, generally happen within a couple of weeks after the main event, but they can go on for months. So be aware of your surroundings more than you are today. Make sure that you know that the zone that you're in, that you're occupying this moment, doesn't have some hazards associated with where you're at. Interior evaluation and finally sheltering in place. Work in pairs. I can't tell you, if I'm busy looking at this, I got to have somebody protecting my backside. I got to have somebody looking up and looking down. What's down? Contaminated soil. Whatever shoes, if you can figure out a way to do it, you can get to your other shoes. You got these shoes on, you're out walking outside. Don't wear those shoes in the house. They're going to have debris from sewers. Going to have petroleum products that's liquefied up to the surface. You don't want to carry that stuff into your home. Work in pairs with appropriate safety gear. Walk the entire perimeter. I mentioned that earlier. I gave this a reasonable facsimile of this to the CERT folks a few weeks ago, and an individual brought up a really good point. Walk around the house one way, and then walk around the house the other way. What you visualize from one location may be different than what you see looking at it a different way. Soil movement, foundation walls, roast chimneys. Boy, I gotta hurry through this. Just imagine, I don't know if you can see this or not, but imagine if it's pouring down rain like it was at 3 o'clock this morning, and we have a seismic event. Yuck. All of a sudden, the dynamics of an event have changed drastically, and not in our favor. This one is really important to me. Can everybody see this? Okay. This is so important to me. I think of Wheeler. No, I do. It'd be really easy to stand at your house and look at your house and say, well, everything looks fine. Do you want a shelter in place with that going on up above? I don't. But that's up to you. You've got to make that determination based on what you see. Don't fail to look up. Okay? I call that the wooden appendage jungle. The most likely part of a building to fail is not the box. It's all the boxes that are attached to it. Decks, porches, porch roofs. Some kind of a little deal that was set on the side. Would you want to shelter in place in that? There's the right answer. What you see in the front isn't necessarily the whole picture. What I would take into consideration here, looking at it from this angle, is this roof displaced? No, it's pretty good. So what's happening here in the front may not be indicative of what's happening in the back. But what you do want when you shelter in place, when you go in a home, you always want to have two ways to get out. One way, hopefully, is going to be the way you came in, and another way is going to be a window that works. So when you decide you want to shelter in place, make sure that every room that you're occupying has a window that opens. This kind of stuff doesn't work real well in a seismic event, but look at the rest of the house. The lines are all, that's what I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at the lines of the building and see whether or not there's anything that's askew. And if things look reasonably like they did before the event, that's a good signal to me. But again, you have to take into consideration of aftershocks. Now, there's a point where I say no. You see, you notice the building's doing this? That's much more serious to me than those columns and appendages that are out of sorts. This building is ready to fail. Okay? Same thing here, buckling. We've got stuff going different directions. Don't even think about going in that building. Detached structures are vulnerable. We were talking about decks earlier. The reason that this thing failed is because it was never attached properly over here. But that said, detached buildings may also be your salvation. Your detached garage may be intact and may not have any discernible hazards associated with it, or a garden shed. We're all going to Carrie's house. She's got this great shed. It's going to stay there, and the rest of our houses are going down the hill. Can I bring my wine over?
Please do.
So, again, look up. Look up. Masonry fireplace. Weighs in excess, the part above that weighs in excess of 2,000 pounds.
Now, you might be, it'll probably go that way when it breaks off, but if the neighbor's house is there and their house is intact and they're gonna stay in that room, they don't wanna be there for that chimneys.
Good point. That's why. Look around. You don't have to think about things today when you go into your house. You don't have to think about, is this place safe? Is this area that I'm sleeping in or watching television in or reading in, is it safe? You don't have to think about it. After a seismic event, you have to think about every moment of every day to make sure that your surroundings aren't going to hurt you. Electric, propane, sewers, aftershocks, neighboring terrain. I've got aftershocks in there again. Emphasize that. Whatever can happen once can happen 2 or 3 times. What was vulnerable once is now twice as vulnerable in an aftershock. I think, we don't need to talk about that. Down power lines, power may be out, but who knows if somehow it might be restored. Is it really out? I don't know. I'm not going to touch it. That's what I was referring to a moment ago with liquefaction. You've got these petroleum products bubbling up out of the ground. You walk in that, you get it on your footwear, you carry that in the house. It's ripe for contamination. And just think if you've got a small cut and you introduce that kind of stuff to a cut. I mean, one of the most significant issues with sheltering in place is staying healthy. And Karen can speak to that. She has a medical background. Okay. You must do this ASAP safely. I got ASAP first, but safely should really be first. You should do this safely ASAP. Safety, safety, safety. Shut down the power to the building. We already talked about that. Shut off the valve for propane. Water at the water heater. No sewer leaking inside. Aftershock potential for days, and monitor the ground around you. Monitor. Make sure you know what's happening in your immediate area. Oh, Isabel left, didn't she? I was going to ask her a question. Who's here? Who's here? Who's here? Who could I ask? I see eye contact. Come on. The young lady with the dark hair. Oh, where's the shutoff valve on the propane tank?
A little knobby thing, maybe?
That little knobby thing. This one?
No.
No, the big one.
The big one? You're right. Okay.
Doesn't work.
If you have a propane tank, take the opportunity to become familiar, and everybody in your household is familiar with where the shutoff valve is. There's that water heater again, the shutoff valve, same picture as before. Interior evaluation. Look at the overhead. Look up. How often do you look up when you're in your house? Only for a spider, maybe, but I mean, you typically don't look up. Aftershocks again, floor system, ingress and egress. Anybody have any question about the terms ingress or egress? Safe way in, safe way out. Okay? There's what can happen in an aftershock. That was Loma Prieta. Everything was okay, but there would have been some signs of failure. And hopefully nobody was there. I have no idea if anybody was in there at the time or not. Hopefully they weren't. Oh, you can't see that one, can you?
Not really.
Darn! So this is a plaster. It's really hard to get these kind of things off the internet sometimes. This was a plaster ceiling and it's sagging down about that far.
And a crack,
Look
it looks
up.
like.
Look up. There's enough plaster there. If that hits you on the head, you're gone. You don't even have time to go anywhere.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
I want to know why she's trying to get her basket down.
Yeah.
Wine. Probably got wine.
Wine in it, okay. So, you see this? That's the chimney that fell off. It went through I inspected 3 or 4 homes where that actually happened, where the chimney went through the roof and through the floor, through the ceiling below. Went through it. In our case, in Portland, it wasn't from a seismic event, it was from a wind event. I'm waiting.
Was she sure?
She's depressed.
That was from one of the more recent New Zealand quakes. Was one of the more recent New Zealand quakes just outside of Christchurch. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, somebody's messing here. This is crazy. But it's real. The floor system gave out. Now, it probably was compromised by powder post beetles or termites or rot. But irregardless, be careful where you go. Your building has been compromised in some way. You need to determine if it's safe to be there. I like that. If in doubt, stay out. If you've got any reservations about where you want to camp, don't do it. I'm going to briefly go off course here. There's a reference in the resiliency plan that Paul and Bernard read a moment ago about ORSAP. Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Committee. Wow, that's a mouthful. Anyway, they approached the governor's office in 2016 and they said, we want to have a program that incorporates folks like Tom and I, an architect and a retired building inspector, to be able to make evaluation of buildings after a seismic event.
For a price.
And that the governor was for it, and several of the other folks who were involved in making that decision were for it. There is an individual who hasn't decided to be on the team. As a result of that, if something happens in this county, right now, there are 3 people who can go around and determine whether or not your building is safe
For the whole county.
for the whole county. And they happen to be in Tillamook,
Yeah.
unless Al happens to be in town and not in Cannon Beach. So 3 people to make that determination. You know what's not going to happen. They're not going to be able to get up.
No.
We're going to have to make these decisions for ourselves. And Linda and I have had some really early, really limited discussion about how we might be able to develop some kind of a program utilizing folks who understand building technology to help do that. Last thing I want is for you folks to be in a building that's not safe. So there will be some kind of a team approach. I don't know where it's going to go. It's a long way off, right? But we're working on it.
It
We've
may
had some
not be
really good
sanctioned by the state at that point, but.
Yeah, well, that's the problem.
And we needed it at the tornado, didn't have it.
Yeah.
Right. Safety first. Obviously, continue your building analysis. Clean up smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. Can you see all this? That's pretty typical. All this crap ends up on the floor. What are the most common ways for people to be injured after an earthquake? Cuts and bruises from falling.
Be up on your tetanus shots.
So make sure you clean up the area that you tend to inhabit. You don't have to do the whole house. Just clean up an area where you can sleep and be sheltered from the elements. You think these are important now? What's the likelihood of a fire after a seismic event? Tenfold. Tenfold. You've got to have working smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. Safe lighting. These guys are inexpensive, safe, don't use up a lot of battery life, little LED or solar. Good way to go. What do you think? Yeah, not safe. Don't do it. How about lanterns?
Outdoor use only.
There you go. Spoken from a true firefighter. So, what, you want to die of carbon monoxide poisoning after you made it through the earthquake? No. Safe wood burning appliances.
No barbecues.
No barbecues, no. I don't know if that firebox is safe. I've got years of inspection experience, but I don't have the tools to inspect that chimney and make sure it's safe. If you've got a wood burning fireplace, you probably don't want to use it. Okay. Wood stove, would I want to use that? I've got a designated flue, a metal flue, that I can see most of, but I can't see all of it. I don't know if maybe it's disjointed someplace and not going to be able to do the job it was intended to do. This particular installation, you can see all of it. The only part that you can't see is horizontal going into the house. If all those joints and connections are okay, I'm comfortable using that system. The wood stove in our house, the flue goes up inside of a chase or a wall cavity. I can't see it. I'm probably not going to use a wood stove.
Take it outside.
Take it outside, there you go. Same thing, don't use the stuff inside. It's designed for outdoor use. Any of you have propane? We call them gas decorative appliances, is the correct name, okay? You can see most of the the joints in the vent in this case is like a chimney that takes the exhaust out. You can see most of those joints. If you can see those, I'm a lot more comfortable using this than I am a wood burning appliance. No barbecues.
Indoors.
Indoors. Generators. How many of you have a generator? How many of you know how to use it? Wow, Linda held her hand up twice, that's good. Obviously you don't want to use it indoors. You can run them to your electrical panel, but don't do it yourself. If you hook it into the electrical system, if you, i.e., plug your generator into the electrical system, and Steve, you can relate to this, if the power could be backfed from the generator into the electrical system, the transmission system, and kill people.
But if it's already in the system and wired that way.
If it's wired that way with a transfer switch, that's the right way to do it. On the supplemental paper to your handout, I've asked for folks to supply questions or information that they might be interested in learning, an increased learning activity, opportunity, and generators is one of the things on there. And I'd be happy to address that at a later date. Generator, make sure you got your owner's manual handy. Plug your appliances into extension cords. And make sure you let it cool prior to refueling. Hey, we're done. Thank you. I really enjoyed being able to share my background and experience with you. I hope that, like I said, I hope you all had some kind of an aha moment. You can take something home with you, share it with your housemates, and recognize that this is an effort to build cohesion and to build a prepared community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.